Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you had a nice lunch, or you had some lunch at least. I don't want to take credit for things I shouldn't take credit for. The host of the Against the Stream is sitting over there, middle. He's the one. He's the one who does all the work in preparing the episodes and so on. I just go there and talk to him a little bit. Now, as Ellen said, what we saw in September, at the beginning of October, across several European countries was unprecedented. We saw, first of all, the Let's Block Everything movement in France. This was a huge wave of strikes, demonstrations, mass movement, which started in a very peculiar way. If I'm not wrong, just before the summer, there was a call put out for this Let's Block Everything appeal for the 10th of September. And the idea was basically to say, look, this is not just a question of one demonstration from A to B or one small strike. Let's paralyze the whole of society. It's not even very clear where this came from. It might have been from some right-wing conspiracy people. But anyway, the idea of block everything, bring society to a halt in order to express your anger, caught on the imagination of many people, young people, workers, left wing of the trade unions. And this developed into a big strike movement on the 10th of September, then on the 18th of September, and the 22nd of September. And the idea was also linked to the government crisis in France. In France, we've had how many prime ministers? Maybe 4 or 5 prime ministers in the space of 1 year. One of them has been prime minister twice, Le Cornu. He resigned and then he was brought back in, and then he resigned just after he's announced his government, then he was brought back in. There's a big political crisis which I will try to explain a little bit more. But the idea was that the mass of the people, workers, the youth, wanted to intervene in this situation and bring down the government. Not just bring down the government, but also bring down the prime minister, the president, Macron. And the idea was just to intervene in society, and it was a very interesting idea behind this. The workers make society run, and if the workers don't work, society comes to a standstill. This was a combination of the idea of an all-out prolonged strike action, but with road blockades of the streets, mass demonstrations, and so on. This has very interesting features, which I will discuss a bit later on. But the idea of let's block everything also caught the imagination of the workers and youth in Italy. And we saw the development in Italy of also a very big movement during the months of, at the end of September, beginning of October. And this movement nominally was over the question of Palestine. They said, let's block everything for Palestine. There was a call for a general strike, 2 general strikes in reality. There was a general strike that was called for the 22nd of September, which was a Monday, by a small union, is it called the rank and file trade union, the USB, how do you translate that? The rank and file union confederation, let's call it that way. And the USB is a small union that has a limited influence. There has some strong points of support in the harbors amongst the dock workers and in the public sector, but it's not a majority union. The biggest majority union in Italy is the CGIL, which comes in the past from a communist tradition. And the CGIL leaders, bureaucratic trade union leaders, they said, okay, we're not going to call with this really small union, which is completely irrelevant. We're going to call our own thing just to pretend that we are doing something on the 19th of September, 3 days earlier, on the Friday. And it's not going to be a proper general strike. Only some sectors will be able to be involved and so on. Now, what happened was that this is like the accident that reveals the necessity for a mass movement. The whole situation escaped the control of the organizers of these demonstrations. On the Friday, there was a big demonstration, a big mobilization. As I said, the question over which this strike was called was the question of Palestine. That is, we want an end to the genocide in Palestine, the collaboration of our own governments with the genocide in Palestine. And I will say this is also a very advanced conclusion in across Europe and in other countries, also in Australia, in the United States. There's been Canada, there's been big movements over, over Palestine against the genocide in Gaza for 2 years. But these movements have also, there is the impression that we haven't achieved anything. We've been marching and marching. In the case of Britain, it is a very peculiar thing. We've been marching every month. At the beginning, it was every week. Big demonstrations. The demonstrations have not decreased in numbers. Still tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people come out. But what have we achieved? Nothing. The genocide continues, is broadcast live on our phones, on our TV screens, and it seems like we are powerless to do anything about it. And so I think this is what transformed in Italy into a mood for a general strike. Let's stop society. And let's not just march from A to B, not inconveniencing anyone, but let's bring everything to a halt. Let's make a very strong point about this question of Palestine. Anyway, so what happened in reality was on the 22nd of September, there was a general strike in Italy over the question of Palestine. This is unprecedented. I have been in politics for some time. I do not remember any other occasions in which there has been workers' action, a general strike over a political question. This is not a strike for wages or conditions or against a finance bill or something. It's a strike over an openly political question, a question of international solidarity. It's an anti-imperialist general strike. This is unprecedented and is extremely significant. Now, we cannot really say that the 22nd of September was a proper general strike in the sense that all sectors of industry came to a standstill. There was a large following of this strike in some sectors more than others, in the public sector, in education, healthcare, in some places in the private sector. It wasn't a proper general strike, but it was a very there was a very good response to the call for general strike, and there was mass demonstrations everywhere. We're talking about tens of thousands of people. In Rome, for instance, there was the idea that we're going to have a picket early in the morning outside the main train station, and instead of just a picket of a few dozen, few hundred, or few thousand, about 10, 20,000 people turned up. This then became an attempt to block the actual train station. Then it became a big demonstration. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people marched in the main cities, in Bologna, in Milan, in Rome, but then also in smaller cities and towns across Italy. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps 1 million or 2 million people came out on the streets on that day, from very early in the morning until late in the afternoon. The mood was very, very strong. And the mood wasn't just because of Palestine. Palestine was the immediate issue that brought people out on the streets, but it was an accumulation of anger, discontent, right-wing governments carrying out austerity policies, attacking the conditions of workers and youth, education, healthcare, and so on. And then what? Then there was something else. This wasn't the end of the movement. The flotilla, the Summit Flotilla, was going to attempt to break the blockade of Gaza. And in the case of the flotilla, there were a number of prominent people, trade union leaders, members of parliament, local politicians from certain countries where this question caught more the attention of the people. One of these countries was Italy. The other one was the Spanish state, where there was also quite a lot of prominent people. Anyway, so as the flotilla was advancing towards Gaza, everyone knew the flotilla was going to be stopped. in perhaps a very violent way. I mean, this is not the first flotilla that's attempted to do that. There's been flotillas for many years, and they all end up in the same way. The Israeli Navy, the Israeli armed forces assault the flotilla in the most brutal way possible, and they arrest people, they detain them in very harsh conditions, and then they expel them from the country. Everyone knew that this was going to happen, but then the organizers of the USB strike said, okay, when the flotilla, if the flotilla is attacked by the Israeli army, we will call a general strike immediately, without even the legal requirement to give a few days advance notice or anything like that. There will be a general strike the day after the flotilla is attacked, if the flotilla is attacked. The leaders of the CGIL, the main trade union, the bureaucrats at the top of this organization, were forced to say, yes, we will also call for this, because they realized that many people in their ranks, in the local structures, shop stewards and so on, they had come out on the other strike. They had lost credibility, and if they didn't join in this call, they will lose even more credibility. And the one thing the bureaucrats want is to preserve their livelihood. They can only be trade union bureaucrats if they have members in their unions that pay fees. So they were pushed to adopt a very radical language and to say, yes, we will also join in and then there was a proper general strike on October the 3rd, when the flotilla was attacked in that week. Then on the October the 3rd, which I think was a Friday, if I'm correct, there was a proper general strike in Italy. Again, a 24-hour general strike over the political issue of anti-imperialism. We cannot underestimate the significance of these events. But also, this wasn't just happening in Italy. It was also happening in Spain. In Spain, there'd been a build-up. The government in Spain, this is a bit long to explain, but just to summarize it, the government in Spain is a so-called left coalition government. The government in Spain likes to pretend, is a friend of the Palestinians, is posturing left. It likes to pretend that is decreed an embargo on arms sales too. But this is all just for show. When you look at the actual details, they haven't done half of the things they claim to have done. And the people in Spain are also very angry across the Spanish state. The people are very angry over the question of the genocide, and they also wanted. And then there was this Vuelta Ciclista, a cycling race. Every year goes around the country, and there is an Israeli team in this cycling race, and the Israeli team is used to promote Zionism and the state of Israel at a time where this genocide is taking place. So people start protesting against this, and there's protests in Catalonia, there's protests in the Basque Country, there's protests in Asturias, there's protests in Galicia. As the race goes across the country, people try to block the road, and there's clashes with the police, and then the whole thing is building up towards the 14th of September, when the final stage of this race is going to take place in Madrid. And then there's going to be a ceremony, the trophies and all that. And then the movement, Palestine movement, says, well, we're going to block the Vuelta Ciclista. We're going to block this cycling race. And the government and the police in Madrid has got a right-wing mayor. The government in Madrid says, you're not going to block the Vuelta. And so then the stage is set for a confrontation. There's thousands of riot police, there's fencing to protect the race, but 100,000 people, according to police estimates, turn up, and you put yourself in the boots of the police officers, and it's very difficult to protect a cycling race that it's several dozen kilometers long. You don't know where people are gonna act to block it and so on. Finally, the people clash with the police. They throw out the fencing and they block the whole route of the cycling race. These images were seen as a victory for the people. They had stopped that cycling race. There was no trophy ceremony. And it's just a small indication of the mood that was building up in Spain that then erupted on the weekend of the 4th and 5th of October, just immediately after the people were watching the Italian general strike. And hundreds of thousands of people turned up at big demonstrations all across Spain over this question of Palestine. And we need to analyze these events. More or less over the same period of time, there was this big demonstration in Amsterdam. They have these demonstrations that are called the Red Line for Palestine. And this was like the 3rd or 4th of these demonstrations. 500,000 people in Holland came out in this demonstration. I don't know what's the population of Holland, but in percentage-wise of the total population, this is a huge demonstration. And so we can see how this question of Palestine is acting like a pole of attraction for all the accumulated discontent in society. People are putting 2 and 2 together, and they're saying the same governments that are carrying out austerity policies that tell us that there is no money for health, no money for education, that we need to cut our pensions. These are the same governments that are fully supporting the genocide in Gaza, that are sending money for the war in Ukraine, where they're telling us there's no money for health and education. And so the question of Palestine has become like a focal point for all this accumulated discontent. But I think that we need to go beyond these events and try to understand what do they mean, what's behind all this. And I will say the title of this talk is European Crisis, Block Everything for Palestine. The key question here is Europe is in crisis, or more precisely, European capitalism is in a deep crisis. It's a crisis that has been building up for decades, that has now come to the surface, and that's at the bottom of these processes of the class struggle in Europe that is building up and that is expressing itself in different ways. The Let's Block Everything movement in France, the general strike in Italy over Palestine, and all of these things are all connected. We have talked in discussions we've had over the last few years about the relative decline of US imperialism and the rise of new imperialist powers on the world scene, and how this is provoking a clash, mainly Russia and China. But what is the position of Europe in all of this? And the position of Europe in all of this is not very good. Because if you can talk of a relative decline of US imperialism, you have to talk over a long, protracted crisis, stagnation, sclerosis, and decline of the different European imperialist powers, Britain, France, Germany, and to a less extent Italy and Spain and others. They have been over a long protracted period of decline, and the change of policy that Trump has introduced in the United States, where he basically says we want to disentangle ourselves from several conflicts in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and we want to concentrate on our main enemy, which is China. We need to re-strengthen the United States in order to deal with our main systemic rival, which is China. But as you probably know, China is in the Pacific. And so if the United States is going to look towards China, it's going to turn its back to Europe. If the main enemy of the United States is no longer Russia or the Soviet Union, as it was for decades in the post-war period, they're no longer so interested in Europe. And this has been expressed by Donald Trump and his envoys, Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, and others in meetings in Europe around the time of February, March, if you remember, there were a number of meetings. And basically Trump has said, look, we're not going to protect Europe anymore. You have to pay for your own protection. You have to raise military spending in the European countries to 5%. If you want to remain in NATO, you need to pay up. And we're no longer interested in all of this. The United States is withdrawing troops from the Baltics, it's withdrawing troops from Germany, and so on. This is a process that's been going on for some time. And this leaves the different European imperialist powers in a very exposed position. And this leads this is aggravated by the long-term decline of European capitalism. When the European Union was formed many years ago, it was an attempt of the relatively weak European imperialist powers to get together to have a better position to compete in the world market. But, and this did work for a period of time, but now that's become into its opposite. By the way, the idea of the European Union was never a union of equals in a union of different economies, which are at different levels and degrees of development. Obviously, what happened is that this was the unity of Europe, or relative unity of Europe, under the domination of Germany. Germany benefited mainly from this union by having a big market that was more or less under its control. And this was the meaning at that time of the European Union. But then came the crisis of 2008. Capitalist crisis of 2008 is a big turning point in the general crisis of capitalism. And as we know, this crisis affected Europe in a particularly severe way. And one of the main impacts of that crisis was the fact that now we are, 17 years later, the European capitalist countries face a new big crisis of capitalism, but they don't have any of the means that they used at that time, or they have used quite a lot of the ways they could in order to get out of the crisis. What did they do immediately after 2008? Well, the first thing they did was to bail out the banks. And immediately after they bailed out the banks, to save the capitalist system from a financial point of view, immediately after that they said, okay, well, someone needs to pay for this. And they implemented massive round of austerity policies everywhere. And this led to big movement. In 2011, we had the Indignados movement in Spain, the occupation of Syntagma Square in Greece. And then this had a political expression. Around 2014, 15, 16, we saw the rise of Podemos in Spain, which was seen as an anti-systemic party of the left, anti-austerity. The coming to power of Syriza in Greece in 2015. The rise of Corbyn in Britain, who won the leadership of the Labour Party. And 400,000 people joined in order to fight against austerity and so on, for socialism, let's say. But however, all these different political expressions to the left against the system, the collapse of the established parties, they all collapsed, or they all revealed their limits, they revealed their bankruptcy. They were unable to fulfill on what they had promised. They said, we're going to stop austerity. And why was it? I mean, the most clear example of this was Greece, where Syriza came to power in 2015. And in a short space of 6 months, they came to power on the basis of saying, we're going to put an end to austerity, we're going to reject this imposition of the memorandums from the European Union. And in the space of 6 months, they even called a referendum to ask people, do you want to accept this memorandum or not? People voted massively, was it 62% or something, against this memorandum? And then immediately, what did the Syriza government do? Implement the memorandum. They said, there's no alternative, there's nothing we can do. It's either this, or we are expelled from the European Union, and Greece is swallowed into a massive hole, and there's no alternative, and we must accept this. And this led to demoralization. Many people that looked to the left for an alternative were now found themselves that the left was no alternative. They had promised to stop austerity. People fought for it on the streets. They fought for it on the ballot boxes, and they were completely disappointed. And this is, I will say, this is what left the political ground open for the rise of right-wing populism, and we have seen in more recent times. Perhaps the most striking example is in Britain, where Reform has gone from being an extra-parliamentary party, which didn't even exist, to now being consistently, since when? Since the beginning of this year, more or less, being consistently at the top of the opinion polls. In some opinion polls, they are 10 points clear of the second party. The second party is sometimes not even the Labour Party, which is in some opinion polls I've seen is fourth. There's been a massive turnaround. there's a fundamental rejection of all the established parties of the right and the so-called left. And this is not just in Britain. We see in France, the Rassemblement National is increasing in the polls. In Germany, the AfD is now polling first in the opinion polls and came quite high in the recent elections. This is the rise of Meloni to power in Italy. But you have to ask yourself, what does this mean? I mean, Meloni was at the head of a party that was very, very low on the opinion polls. It was an irrelevant party. But what government was in power in Italy at that time? A government of all the parties. All the parties were together in one big technocratic government led by a banker which was implementing austerity policies. So therefore, there was only one party that was outside of this, and some people in protest at the existing status quo voted for the party that was the anti-establishment party. This is perfectly understandable. And I will say that the main responsibility for this is the bankruptcy of the left in the period immediately before that. And the bankruptcy of the left comes for one main reason. It is that all these different movements, the leaders of these movements, they were talking very radical, they were talking against austerity, and this and that. Some of them even talked about socialism. But fundamentally, they are reformists, and they think that the problem is that austerity is an ideological choice. That if you have a different government, you can implement a different policy. But this is not true. This is fundamentally false. Austerity, that is the policy of making the working class pay for the crisis of capitalism, is the result of the crisis of capitalism. If capitalism wasn't in crisis, then there might be room for different policies, but the reason why they're cutting on the acquired gains of the working class for decades and decades, increasing the pension age, decreasing the pension amount, attacking casualization of labor, cuts in education, the destruction of the National Health Service. All of this is the result of the crisis of capitalism and the fact that the governments all follow the policy of making the workers pay for the crisis of capitalism. It's not an ideological choice. And if you want to go against these policies, you need to break with capitalism. As long as you stay within, and I will say, I don't have all the time in the world to go into this, but I will say that the clearest example of this is Yanis Varoufakis. Yanis Varoufakis is a politician who thought was very clever. And he had this idea: I'm going to trick the European Union into accepting my policies. He was very much into game theory. And, but the problem he had is that he was playing a game of 3D chess, but the other side was playing a boxing match. And we know who won. But he had this idea. His idea was, I'm going to convince a very reasonable proposal that the European Union should give us a little bit more time. We will implement austerity later on. We will repay our debt later on once the economy is growing. And the European Union said, no, this is now. You must repay your debt now. Because if Greece didn't repay its debt, then Spain will say, okay, let's give us some more time. And then Portugal say, no, let's give us a few more months. We'll pay later on. And then Italy and all these countries and then the whole European capitalist system will have collapsed at that time. And they needed to make sure fiscal austerity, fiscal discipline, austerity, and so on. These policies had to be implemented. The working class had to be made to pay the crisis of capitalism. There's no room for, there's not a lot of room for maneuvering this. Now, this is what, 10 years ago, right? Is now, that was 2015. Now it's 2025. And we have exactly the same situation, if not worse. Crisis of capitalism is now worse than it was at that time. I will argue, first of all, because there has been, in the intermediate period, an increase in the accumulation of debt, inasmuch as the governments have been unable to solve this crisis. The levels of debt to GDP have increased in all European countries, just to mention some. In Greece, after massive rounds of austerity cuts and fiscal discipline, the debt is 150% of GDP. That means that everything that's produced in Greece, goods and services in 1 year, the Greek economy owes 1.5, or rather the Greek state owes 1.5 times all of that. That's impossible to pay. But the situation is no better in Italy, where the debt is 130% of GDP. In France, 115%. In Belgium, Britain, and Spain is over 100% or around 100%. And this, at the time of higher interest rates, means that these governments are spending massive amounts of money in paying back interest to the bankers and speculators and vultures in the stock exchange. We have just seen the Chancellor of the Exchequer in Britain, Rachel Reeves, who announced certain measures, then she withdrew certain measures, but you heard this noise in the background. The bond markets are getting restless. They don't like this. Who's the bond markets? The bond markets are a group of parasites, bankers, speculators, people who put their money in government debt, and they're just sitting there, and they're just dictating the policies of the government. So this means that there are some governments, like for instance Britain, where the price of the repayment of interest, not the debt, just the interest on the debt, is £100 billion a year. £100 billion a year we are giving to the speculators, the bankers, and the so-called investors. In France, it is 54 billion euros. In Germany, 60 billion euros. So when you hear about cuts in education, about cuts in health spending, about cuts in pension, and then you can put two and two together. This is where the money is going. On top of this, they have unlimited commitments to the war in Ukraine, as Alan was explaining yesterday. Billions and billions of money every year for as long as it takes. So this is the policies of capitalism in this particular time of crisis, and there is very, very little that any of these governments can do about it, even if they wanted, which they don't. And so this is the origin this is the depth and the character of the crisis of capitalism in Europe that leads all these governments into a direct clash with the mass of the population. And this is expressed, I will say, in the most extreme case in France. In France, why is it that we've had so many prime ministers since November, December last year? The reason is because the government has no parliamentary majority. And the government needs to implement cuts to the tune of 50 billion euro, 40 billion euro, 30 billion euro. And it cannot find enough people sitting in that parliament to vote for this. Why? Because these people know that if they vote for these measures, then they will not be elected at the next election. And there must be a next election at some point. And so they also have their own interest of being re-elected. So if you think about this, what it means is that the interests of the capitalists to make the working class pay for the crisis of capitalism enter into direct contradiction with the democratic process of electing members of parliament. And this is why, in the last period, the French government has been using emergency decree powers. Article 49.3, which allows the government and the president to pass very unpopular measures which have no parliamentary majority. And then this is then followed by a motion of censorship, and that government falls. And then a new government is formed, which carries exactly the same policies for a few months until that government falls. There's no solution to this. And what they are very afraid of is that if they go to the polls, they will not get a government that's prepared to carry out these measures. They will get a government of what? A government of the extremes, those who are against the establishment, or at least seem to be against the establishment. The right-wing demagogues of Le Pen. Why do you think Le Pen is being inhabilitated for standing for public office? Because they fear that she will win the election if she's allowed to stand. And then the left anti-establishment forces of Mélenchon and France Insoumise and so on. These are the people who are going to rise in the next election. And obviously capitalism in France is very worried about any of these two forces forming a government, because this will not settle the matter, will not create a strong government that carries out the necessary cuts that are necessary for the crisis of capitalism. It will create a weak government, a government that's been elected on a mandate against these cuts, government that will be put to the test and under enormous pressure from below. And this is what's happening. As I said, austerity and cuts enter into direct contradiction with even the formal trappings of bourgeois democracy. We know bourgeois democracy is not really democratic. You elect a government, but the capitalists are the ones who take all the decisions. But at least there is the semblance of certain procedures and certain. In Germany, they had an election, and obviously all the parties that were previously in government, the Greens, the Liberals, and the Social Democrats, were smashed at those elections, but no one came on top in a serious way. There was no parliamentary majority. So they formed a government, a coalition government of the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. But this government didn't have a majority to break the constitutional fiscal rule that says that you cannot spend more than 3% of GDP. You cannot have a budget deficit of more than 3% of GDP. And they needed to spend more money. They needed to spend more money for what? For weapons for Ukraine, for military spending. And so they didn't have a majority. So they did a trick, right? The people had already voted for a different parliament, but they used the last few days of the old parliament to pass this resolution saying, no, we can spend more money because we need rearmament, we need defense spending. So this is completely undemocratic. And then people get surprised if the only party that stayed outside of this pact, the AfD, is now first in the opinion polls. Obviously, because this is seen as the only party that says, no, we don't want any of these policies. No, why should we be supporting the war in Ukraine? There's another element to this, which I think is very important. You see, the European capitalists went along, some more reluctantly than others, went along with Biden and his policy of facing off Russia in Ukraine. And what did they do? They implemented sanctions on Russia, which Alan talked about it yesterday, but sanctions on Russia and really sanctions on Europe, because previously European capitalists were getting relatively cheap deal of gas and oil from Russia. Now they've been cut off from this. And this has provoked a massive economic crisis, particularly in countries like Germany. Now Germany is the most powerful capitalist country in Europe, as I said before. And in the past, it used to be the locomotive of European capitalism. No more. Germany has been in economic recession for 3 years running, 2023, 2024, and now it's 2025. It's still not recovered. Industrial production is falling, and in the most energy-intensive sectors of the economy, like, I don't know, the paper industry and some other industries, the collapse of industrial production in the last 2 or 3 years has been phenomenal. We talk about 10, 20, 25, 35% in some sectors, collapse in the volume of industrial production in these sectors. Why? One of the main reasons is the increased prices of energy. Another factor is the increased competition from China. I was telling Hamid on Friday, this year, for the first time, the balance of trade between Germany and China in machine tools, we're not talking about cheap textiles or cheap electronics or anything like this, machine tools, which is what Germany, with its advanced engineering industry, used to sell to China, it's now the other way around. China is selling more machine tools to Germany than the other way around. This is the change balance of forces, and this puts the European capitalism and German capitalism at a particularly difficult position to get out. And this is what drives this relentless pressure towards cuts, austerity, and attacks on the working class, which is at the basis of the political crisis in all countries, because they cannot find a government that has popular support for carrying out these policies. This leads me to another important point. You have seen, there's comrades here from different European countries, maybe they can give us their own experience, but you have seen for the last 1 year or maybe 2 years, but it's been increasing, a campaign, an hysterical campaign of saying we need to spend a renewed militarism policy all across Europe. We need to spend more money because of Russia. Russia is a threat. I was reading an article the other day that said European experts say that Russia is going to invade NATO. And it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Some experts think it's going to happen in the next week. Some other experts say it's going to happen in the next 6 weeks. Some other experts say it's going to happen in the next 1 year. This is all, I don't know, I don't want to use a strong word. This is being recorded and maybe streamed. But this is all false, let's say. It's a departure from reality. Russia has no real interest in attacking Europe. Russia wants to strengthen its own spheres of influence, doesn't want to be encroached upon by NATO. But the real reason why the different European imperialist countries want to rearm and want to strengthen their position is because if the United States is no longer interested in the defense of Europe, then these countries are on their own. And they are weak. They are weak in relation to Russia. And it's not a question that Russia is going to invade, but Russia, by having a strong army that's come out of a victorious war in Ukraine, that has withstood sanctions from Europe, represents a strong rival to these European pygmies of imperialist powers. And this means that Germany is no longer in a strong position to dominate Eastern Europe, as it happened 30 years ago, when most of these Eastern European countries became colonies of German capital. France is no longer in a very strong position in the west of and Central Africa, which is his main sphere of imperialist influence, and so on and so forth. The real reason is not that the Russian tanks are going to cross the Pyrenees tomorrow morning. The real reason is that the European imperialist powers want to protect their own imperialist interests, which have nothing to do with the interest of workers and youth in Europe, in the face of another imperialist power, which is now stronger than it was. This is the real reason. And this is why you see all these mysterious drones disrupting European airports, some of which then dissipate into thin air when you look into the actual details. There's this war hysteria because they want to get public opinion on side in order to support these policies of militarism, which is very difficult. In Germany, if I'm not wrong, this week in Germany they reintroduced the compulsory military service, which they didn't have in the past. And in all countries there is this pressure towards militarism, arms spending, and so on. And who's going to pay for this? We know who's going to pay. Who they're going to attempt to make the working class pay for all of this. And this is basically the situation of the European crisis. And this is linked to another thing I will say, or two things. These events in September and the beginning of October represent the first stirrings of a massive wave of the class struggle that's coming in Europe, inevitably, I will say, inevitably. And they have some very interesting common features. One, the participation of the youth, both in Italy and in France, in this and in the Spanish state. In this movement, these movements are mainly led by the youth, or the youth is the most dynamic element within this mobilization. Why? Because the youth are the ones who've grown up under this period of capitalist crisis since 2008. Anyone who's 20, anyone who's 25, perhaps anyone who's under 30 today, and this is the big majority of people in this room, myself not included, anyone who's under 30 today has grown, become conscious of politics and so on in this period of capitalist crisis. These people, which is the majority of the population, they are very polarized to the right, to the left. They're the ones who are more open to radical ideas and direct action. And there is a material reason for this, because capitalism has nothing to offer to them. The older generation, some of them might be looking back, oh, in the old good days of the capitalist upswing, but these days are gone. They're not coming back. And for most young people, these days have never existed. All they've seen is capitalism means war, crisis, genocide, austerity, cuts, casualization of labor, the impossibility of getting your own flat, forming a family. I mean, these are the conditions that capitalism is condemning young people to. Number two, second feature of these movements is the fact that these movements came from below. They were not organized by the big traditional organizations. They were pushed from below. In the case of Italy, by a small radical union. In the case of France, nobody knows by whom, but the left wing of the CGT played a big role in criticism with the official leaderships. This is the pressures coming from below. And it's expressing itself one way or another. It's pushing sometimes, like the case of Italy, the official organizations to take a move, but it's mainly coming from the bottom. And the third element, I will say, is direct action. Right? People no longer content with marching from A to B in a mostly symbolic demonstration. They want to do something. And in the case of the Palestine movement, this is extremely important, because what we have seen in Italy is the direct workers' boycott of the trading with Israel. The governments can talk, the governments can make statements, the governments might even be forced to say, oh, we recognize Palestine. What Palestinian state do you recognize? Palestine is completely being razed to the ground, and you make a statement that says, oh, yeah, we recognize. That means nothing. But the workers in Livorno or in Genova stopping trade with Israel, that makes a direct impact. It makes a difference. And this is what we've been arguing since the beginning of the Palestine movement, for a workers' boycott, a direct action. And also the fact that the struggle for Palestine, for us here in Europe, the struggle for Palestine is the struggle against our own governments. And therefore, this struggle needs to be linked. The struggle against our own governments because they support the genocide in Gaza needs to be linked with the struggle against our own governments because they carry out these cuts and attacks and assaults on the working class in our own countries. And if we manage to link these two things together, then there will be a very powerful, it will have a big, powerful impact. The last point I want to say is that what I think this means is events in September and October. Now it's November now, and it seems like, again, not much is happening. Well, I mean, yesterday there was a national day of action in Italy of the students against the finance bill and so on. These movements go up and down, but we are in a period of class struggle, inevitably with ups and downs, but this is the period of turbulence and big battles on the industrial front, among the youth and so on, over different questions. This means, I will say, that Europe, the advanced capitalist countries in Europe are preparing themselves to join the worldwide current of what is being known as the Gen Z revolution. The overthrow of the government in Nepal, the overthrow of the government in Madagascar, mass movements in Indonesia, in Peru, in Morocco, and in many other countries. We're just talking about the last couple of months, because before that we had the overthrow of the government in Bangladesh and many other things over the last few years. Revolutionary events. And these revolutionary events, which are happening so far mainly in countries dominated by imperialism, are now coming into the central advanced capitalist countries of Europe and the United States. And there are many indications of this. The only question is, not whether there will be movements, whether there will be big class battles. These are being prepared inevitably by the objective conditions and the development of consciousness that as a result of this. The main question is whether these movements, whether we will be able to provide these movements with a revolutionary leadership that can take them to victory, not just to overthrow one government, so that then you have another government that carries out more or less the same policies, case Nepal, case Bangladesh, and so on, but that once in one country or another, finally the workers come to power and put an end to capitalism, put an end to this system which can only guarantee misery, oppression, and exploitation and violence. We open the way for a completely different form of society, which today is not only possible, but absolutely necessary. So it's not just a question of analyzing what's happening, but also preparing for events that are being developed under the surface, the indications of which we have already seen in the last couple of months.